The unseen passenger. Jack Miller had always loved the open road. As a long-haul truck driver for over a decade, he was used to the routine: pick up a load, drive through the night, deliver on time, and do it all over again. The road was his home, and the hum of the engine was a constant companion that kept him calm and focused. On a cold, foggy night, Jack got his latest assignment, transporting heavy machinery from Denver to a remote town in Oregon. The route was familiar, but the dispatcher's warning stuck with him. There's been some weird weather up north, and a few detours. Drive safe, Jack. Jack shrugged it off, loaded up his rig, and hit the highway. He didn't know it then, but this trip was going to be anything but routine. A few hours into the drive, the fog thickened, blanketing the road in a gray haze that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Jack slowed down, turning on his high beams. That's when he saw the first strange sign. The dashboard screen flickered, and for a brief moment, a message appeared: "Turn back." Jack blinked, thinking it was a glitch, but when he glanced at the screen again, it was gone. He shook his head, brushed it off, and kept driving. He'd seen plenty of weird things on the road before, but as he drove deeper into the night, the messages kept appearing, each one more urgent than the last. "Danger ahead. Turn around now. You're not alone." The fog seemed to thicken, swirling around his truck like a shroud. Jack gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was starting to get uneasy. This wasn't normal, but he wasn't about to turn back. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to let some malfunctioning GPS spook him. But then, he heard a faint, scratching noise coming from the back of the truck. It was so quiet that at first, he thought it was just his imagination. But as the miles ticked by, the sound grew louder, more persistent. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, but all he could see was darkness. Whatever was making the noise was inside the cargo hold, and that wasn't possible. He'd locked it himself before leaving Denver. He pulled over at a gas station, planning to check the cargo. The place was eerily deserted, the bright lights flickering, casting long shadows. Jack climbed out, his breath misting in the cold air. He hesitated for a moment, then opened the back of the truck. The machinery was there, just as it should be, tightly secured and unmoved. Nothing was out of place. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As he climbed back into the cab, he heard a soft, almost whispered voice, "Don't stop." Jack froze, his heart pounding. He whipped around, but there was no one there. He laughed nervously, trying to convince himself that he was just tired, that he'd been on the road too long. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life. "Get a grip, Jack," he muttered to himself, pulling back onto the highway.
But the messages didn't stop. They became more frequent, more frantic. "Danger. Slow down. Turn back." The scratchy noise returned, louder than before, like something was trying to claw its way out. Jack felt his skin crawl. He knew he should stop, turn around, call for help. But every time he thought about pulling over, a sudden wave of dread washed over him, as if something was warning him not to. By now, Jack was gripping the steering wheel so tight his hands hurt. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around the truck, obscuring the road. The GPS went haywire, recalculating the route over and over again, but every time it settled on the same destination, a small, unmarked road off the main highway. Jack didn't remember seeing it on the map, but it was the only route the GPS would accept. Reluctantly, he turned onto the narrow, winding road, hoping to find a place to turn around. The further he drove, the darker it got. The trees loomed tall and twisted on either side, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The scratching grew louder, and now it wasn't just scratching. Jack could hear faint whispers, like voices trying to form words, but never quite managing to. He thought he heard his name, whispered low and drawn out, echoing through the fog. Suddenly, the road opened up into a clearing. In the distance, Jack could see a faint light flickering like a candle in the dark. As he drove closer, he realized it was an old weather-beaten sign. "Last stop." Jack's heart raced. He hadn't seen this place on any map, and he had no idea how he'd ended up here. But he knew he had to keep going. He had to see this through, whatever it was. The messages had stopped, and the silence was suffocating. As he drove past the sign, the scratching and whispering stopped altogether. The fog began to lift, and Jack could see a small, run-down gas station ahead, its lights flickering. He pulled up, but when he stepped out of the truck, the place was empty. No cars, no people, nothing but the distant hum of electricity. Jack approached the gas station, and as he reached for the door, it swung open by itself. Inside, there was a counter, a few shelves, and a single, old-fashioned radio. Jack stared at it, unsure what to do. Then the radio crackled to life and a distorted voice came through, clear and cold. "You were warned." The lights flickered and then went out, plunging Jack into darkness. For a moment, he stood there, paralyzed, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then he heard the unmistakable click of the cargo hold opening on its own. Jack turned, his heart hammering in his chest, and slowly walked back to the truck. The back was wide open, and the machinery had been moved, pushed to one side. Something was there, hidden in the shadows. Jack stepped closer, and as he did, a figure stepped out of the darkness. He couldn't make out its face, but he could see its eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light.
It spoke, its voice low and guttural. "I told you not to stop." Jack's mind reeled. He wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The figure stepped closer, and Jack could finally see its face. It was a mirror image of himself, but twisted, distorted, like a reflection in a cracked mirror. The thing smiled, its eyes cold and empty. "You didn't listen." The fog returned, thicker than before, swallowing the truck, the gas station, everything. And just like that, Jack was back on the road, driving through the night as if nothing had happened. The GPS was silent, the dashboard clear, but Jack knew better. He could still hear the faint scratching, still feel the cold dread creeping up his spine. Somewhere out there, in the fog and darkness, the unseen passenger was still with him, waiting.